Hi, this is Cheney McKnight here with another Ask a Black Reenactor, and today I have a special guest, Mia Marie.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming today. My question was, what is better than one Black reenactor, two Black reenactors? So I have my Pipkin here. This is actually the very last Ask a Black Reenactor for this season. And we only have a few left in here. I think we only have 5. So we are going to be picking 3 questions today. And then
I'm excited. I don't know what the questions will be, so this is going to be crazy. I know it's going to be crazy and random.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
You're in. My listeners asked some pretty crazy questions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you the honors of picking first and answering first.
Okay. Let's see what it says. All right. Here's the question. What do you like to be called, Black or African American? This is a very, very interesting question because I also think it has something to do with how you were raised growing up, how you identified as yourself. What did your parents reference themselves as? What did you reference yourself as? I know when I was growing up, especially in the community where I was, a lot of people as kids said African American. But then I think it was after middle school and high school, more people just identify themselves as just, oh, I'm Black, this or that. You don't really hear Black American, but rather just that as a general. Oh, I'm a Black woman, I'm a Black man, versus, oh, I am an African American woman or an African American man. So with the question being, what do you like to be called, Black or African American? I mean, obviously I'm both, and, you know, very mixed heritage. However, when I'm identifying myself, I often will say, oh, as a Black woman. But I think when I am identifying myself more in maybe like professional sense, like something online or whatever, it says, oh, an African American woman who portrays this aspect of history.
Well, for myself, I found that before college, I identified as Black.
Yeah.
And I do know that a lot of my older family members identified as Negro, actually. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was way too like old school. I was like,
yeah, that's kind of like, whoa.
I was like, Uncle, it is 2012. Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah.
And so, but once I went to college, I started identifying as African American because for the first time I was really around people who were not descendants of slaves. I was with people who were from a multitude of countries in Africa. So yeah. I was friends with Kenyans, with Liberians, with Nigerians, mm-hmm. and then people from the Caribbean. So, and they identify themselves as Kenyan American, Nigerian American. And so I identified myself as African American, number one, because I don't know what tribe or area I came from.
Which is very hard to identify.
Yeah, and some people who are not descendants of slaves identify descendants of American slaves as African American.
Yeah.
So that's why I choose to go by African American, but I really have no preference per se. So right. Black or African American. You may see in some of my posts I switch between the two. So yeah. I'm not going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not Black, it's African American, or it's not African American, it's Black. So you'll never hear that argument from me.
And I think one of the interesting things about African Americans is that it's such a melting pot. I mean,
Yes.
honestly,
That's
you
true.
have so many other cultures that you're related to that it makes it really just kind of like this bouquet of so
Yes.
many different cultures wrapped into one, but a lot of the similarities has roots in Africa, or like you were saying,
Europe.
Korea,
Yeah.
Caribbean, you know, all of these different places. But, you know, it is very interesting.
That is true.
Mhm.
I find that my mixed race friends from other countries will say I am German and Nigerian American, which as mixed African Americans will say I am African American, because I think that there's this kind of understanding that you are
Yeah.
a melting pot as an African American, a
Right.
descendant of American slaves.
Right.
So we're gonna move on
Yeah.
to the next. We could go on forever.
Yeah, but you know, honestly, this was a great question because a lot of people wonder, not wanting to offend anyone,
Yeah,
what
they're
do
so
you
scared.
prefer? Yeah, and I noticed that, and it's not really that big of a
Yeah.
deal, but there are, for some people, it is a huge deal because it has to do with being identified. Like if you say, oh, I am Italian, or I am German, or I am this or that, it's a way of identification.
Yeah, and we won't even get into cultural
Yeah.
identification. Okay, we'll say that for another time. All right, I'll do the next pick.
Hey, I like to.
Yeah, we both like
Yeah.
when we get
Yeah.
together. It's so sad. Whoa, really? Do I really have to get this huge question?
Okay.
This looks really good. Do you typically portray a Northern African American or a Southern one? Are the roles significantly different for you regarding dress, demeanor, etc.? Do you like one role better than the other? Heather from Greenville, South Carolina. For me, it's a mixed bag. I was very lucky to move to New York, so I've had this ability to commute anywhere, because if you're in New York City,
Yeah.
you can, there's a bus, train, plane, boat going somewhere that you need to be. So I've been able to travel a lot, so I've been able to do northern impressions and southern impressions. As far as dress and demeanor, it's pretty much the same unless you are portraying a slave. But I find that some of the slave impression, the clothing, is very similar to poor free blacks up north. So I kind of interchange my clothing for that. Also, well, we also have different weather. So I find that my northern impressions, when I do it in the fall, it's a lot warmer, has a lot more wools in it.
Many layers.
Yeah, lots.
And you know, also the items might be secondhand for that impression as well. So a lot of times people think that you have to be dressed in rags, but that's not necessarily always the case, as we found through different runaway ads, through you know, journal entries and so on. I know for myself, I started out reenacting in Georgia, so I instantly went into a Southern role. This was something that was very unique because for a lot of the people around me, they had never really seen much of that at every event or many of the events they had been to. So it was a different impression. And as I moved to a few other northern states, I started to incorporate some, a little bit more middle class impressions. But for the most part, I've kept it Southern impression or runaway impression.
And I think that as for more versatility, just because you are up north does not mean that you didn't come up north from the south, especially when you're African American.
Right.
Also, I find that up north I have the ability more to portray middle class free blacks. So I'm really actually enjoying that. I'm building my middle class impression right now, so I'm really excited about that. Also, down south as well, I had the ability for the Battle of New Orleans to actually portray an upper class free woman for 1810s, and I was I love that.
And those are unique things.
Yeah.
You never see that. And that's what makes it so unique, because a lot of times people think that if you are African American, you almost have to go into a default role as an enslaved person. But just like we have so many different jobs and occupations today, many people of color during that time had many different jobs and occupations, not always an enslaved role.
That is very true. Well, I think we answered that. Thank you, Leah. Okay, now it's your turn. No, you have one more.
Oh, okay.
Don't be trying to get out of this.
I'm not. I will talk all day because this is a lot of fun. Let's see what the next question is. Do you refuse to portray any impressions? And if so, which ones? That is a very good question. This is from someone in Gainesville, Georgia.
Okay.
And I think, do I refuse to portray any impressions? The implication is that I was told to portray something specifically, and I said, no, I will not do that. Thus far, I have not been told to portray anything, any sort of impression. However, there are some that I think are a little bit more detailed, and I know for myself, I actually have kept away from doing an upper class impression of an African American during the 1860s because I want that to be extremely research based and detailed and completely accurate to the best of my ability. And so I put off doing anything like that until I have everything set the way I would want it to be portrayed. But thus far, all the different impressions that I've done, I believe it's just really been based on the people of the area and those enslaved around where the event is going to be held.
Yeah. Well, I personally have refused to do an impression. I'm so awkward.
No. See, this is great.
Because I was requested, I think I said this in a video before, someone requested that I portray an African American that owned slaves, and that slave would have been the only slave at the event, and I refused. And I will refuse to do that. As before, I said that I will definitely portray a black slave owner if you can find 20 other African Americans to portray slaves. I will definitely portray a black slave owner, just because I think that you have to do the proper ratios. I don't think that I don't like that you're at an event in an area that would have had a very large slave owning population. Well, most of the blacks in the area would have been slaves, and only 1% of the slaves were owned by African Americans. So that's just, I do refuse to do that unless, the conditions are right.
Yeah, and it can get hard. A lot of times these events are based on, as far as the ratio goes, the area could have 80 or 90% enslaved people for that area. And it is very hard sometimes where you don't see that reflected as often. So that is where the challenges of being an African American reenactor come in. So.
And I know we always try to portray the majority. We don't ever want to go to an event where we're the only black people there and we're walking around in I guess as black slave owners being the only black people at the event, because that does not reflect the population of the time. Just like I wouldn't want whites to portray impressions that would have never been in the area, or I like to reflect the ratios properly.
And I think that's very helpful because as living historians, it's that historian part of us. We want to be able to make every event something where we're able to teach the public or even in ourselves learn more about those people who had gone before us. So, that's what makes it so important that we want to do things accurately, but at the same time, make it so that it's a great learning experience and it's something that the public, if it is a public event, will take something away from it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mia, for
You're
coming.
welcome.
I finally got her in New York, and I was just like, "You're gonna be on the last episode." I didn't really ask her. I kind of shoved her in front of a camera. So she has been a wonderful sport, and she is doing. You did an awesome job. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Shani, and thank you guys for listening. I love this. This was a lot of fun. Great questions.
Yay, thank you guys for sending in all your questions for Ask a Black Reenactor. It's so funny because this was the last episode, and I got like 10 questions last week. So I was just like, whoa. But I will file them away. I possibly will be bringing back Ask a Black Reenactor if I get enough support for it, and if anybody asks me to bring it back, I'll bring it back for a second season. So you never know.
These questions are great, and we so appreciate these questions because a lot of times when we're at events, you know, many people feel very intimidated to ask them. So
yes,
this is great.
Yeah, they're like, I always get that after events. I really wanted to ask you something. I was like, please come up to me and ask. So even if I don't bring back Ask Black Reenactor, pretty please feel comfortable to come up to us and ask questions. We always enjoy that, and we're always open to it. So thank you guys for watching. You will definitely see a lot more videos from me, and if you would like to see Ask a Black Reenactor return, please send me messages or comment down below. So have a good day.